right, well, again, welcome everyone to today's webinar, Bullying in the Workplace. My name is Erin, and my colleague Eric and I will be hosting today's talk, so if you need any help at all during the webinar, you can contact us through the chat box, which is in your GoToWebinar meeting panel over on the right of your screen. Our talk today will last about 45 minutes and be followed with a live Q&A with our presenter. We encourage you to submit any and all questions that you have at any time during the talk. You can put them in the questions panel, which is also over on the right of your screen. And everything you ask is anonymous, so we're happy to pass on any questions that come up for you. Also, a recording of today's webinar and a copy of the presenter's slides will be sent to you in a follow-up email tomorrow. So the email will prove that you attended the webinar if you need that, and then also give you all of the materials. So you can rewatch it and use the slides whenever you need to. So before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our presenter, Mary Ellen Sposato-Rogers. Ms. Rogers is principal of Accelerate, an exciting new health optimization and human capital management firm that combines innovative strategies to maximize wellness and productivity. Ms. Rogers was the founder and former CEO of Work-Life Innovations, an employee assistance program specializing in work-life resource and referral services to major corporations and hospitals for more than 20 years, including Yale New Haven Health System, Bank One, McDonald's, Horizon Blue Cross, and ESPN, just to name a few. Under Mary Ellen's direction, the company was the first vendor ever to be named an Innovative Excellence Award winner by the Alliance for Work-Life Progress, an honor they received twice. Prior to founding Work-Life Innovations, Ms. Rogers, a social worker, was the director of staffing and recruiting for the Travelers Insurance Company. She spent many years as a human resources consultant, trainer, and coach. Her diverse social work career includes management roles in home health care and child welfare. Ms. Rogers was named one of 2006's 8 Remarkable Women in Business by the Hartford Business Journal. She serves on the Board of Trustees of Providence College, the Board of Trustees of the Foundation for the Advancement of Catholic Schools, and the Executive Board of Women Executives in Healthcare. And she's been quoted by many periodicals, including Forbes, HR Magazine, the New York Times, Business Insurance, Working Mother, Glamour, and Workforce Magazine. We are so happy to have you with us today, Mary Ellen. Welcome.
Erin, it is such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to be here to talk about this extremely popular topic, but a topic that often doesn't get talked about because we feel a little bit anxious about talking about bullying in the workplace particularly. And for many of us, we had memories maybe of either being a bully as a child or being bullied as a child, and all of that harks back to the workplace in spades, actually. So, without further ado, let's talk about a definition of bullying. So what is it? Well, basically, as you can see, it is that repeated mistreatment of one or more persons or targets by one or more perpetrators that is abusive and can compromise health. I want to spike a few words out in that sentence. The first word is repeated. Repeated does not have to mean every day, every week. It could be every time you're in a meeting, somebody calls you down. Might be that every time you're engaged in project work with a particular individual, your work is a little bit sabotaged. So repeated is a relative term here, for sure. And also, I want to highlight at the end of that sentence, can compromise health. And what we mean by that is that when someone is bullied in the workplace, it is extremely common for that person to experience extraordinary stress, anxiety, and even depression as a result of it, particularly if it is long-term bullying, or you sort of feel like there's no way out of this box. And the mistreatment is offensive conduct and is threatening, humiliating, or intimidating. And again, threatening can have many definitions. It can be a very overt threat to you, sometimes verbally, sometimes in an email, or it can just be that look across a conference table you might get. In any respect, humiliating. So, you know, cracks in a meeting that humiliate you, or a way of giving you such a tight time frame that you can't get the job done. It's humanly impossible to get the job done in that time frame, and then you are humiliated. And certainly all of that is extremely intimidating. Interferes with work, sabotages, or prevents work from getting done, certainly. and includes verbal and emotional abuse, and occasionally physical abuse or physical threat. When it gets to that point, then it becomes something completely different and becomes severe harassment. Now, I want you to look at the notation at the bottom of that screen. The 2014 Workplace Bullying Institute survey is where I derived this information. But the good news here is that for years, workplace bullying existed, and it was kind of undefined, and people were afraid to talk about it. So then, there was so much talk about bullying in our schoolyards and such, and we've conquered that problem. And every school has a policy about bullying, and there are rules and laws against bullying, and that's great. So then folks started to look at what was going on in the workplace more seriously. And as a result, we have some excellent organizations, one being the Workplace Bullying Institute. Actually, Forbes magazine has done lots of work around bullying. There is some legislation on the table. So we've made great strides, but a lot more needs to be done. So with that said, I would like to ask you for your experience. We have a very brief poll here, and there are 3 questions that you can respond to. One being, I have been the target of a workplace bully. And if that has been your experience, please check that box. I have been a bully in the workplace, but have changed my behavior. Now, for many of us, if we really look back and reflect, and certainly we probably never intended to be, but maybe we did come across as a bully to an employee or to a peer at one point or another. And then the third option, I am or have been a supervisor or manager dealing with a bullying situation. So if you could respond to that, we'll give you some time to do that, and then we'll take a look at the results.
Well, Mary Ellen, we have about 75% of the folks that say they've been a target and about 25% that are supervisors dealing with the issue.
Okay, all righty. That's good to know. Frequently, we do also see some folks who recognize that maybe they exhibited some bullying behavior that they didn't intend. But the majority of folks that we address in this session usually have at least been the target of a workplace bully, which is not a pleasant place to be. So how do you know? Well, anybody who's ever had that sick feeling in their stomach starts usually about 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon when you realize the day is almost over, and for the next 5 days you have to spend it in that work environment with the bully. Your doctor, despite the fact maybe that you do all the right things, you eat the right stuff, you work out, maybe you're even on blood pressure medication and you can't get your blood pressure to lower, it's skyrocketing. Sometimes that is the direct effect of a workplace bully. You feel too ashamed of the fact that someone is controlling you at work to share the issue with your partner or family. And, when you think about it, when someone is controlling us, that's a loss of our independence. We can feel like very weak people that we're letting that happen. And so even with those closest to us, we may be reluctant to share that with them. So what happens is not only are you sick, because as I mentioned, bullying can impact your health in terms of stress, depression, and anxiety, but it can also impact your family relationships, your important friendships, partnerships, your spouse, your significant other. It can impact those relationships. And I think the important thing to remember is if you're not talking to them about what you're feeling and what's going on, they're making assumptions that it's something to do with them. So don't be afraid to tell them, because you notice that in this session, 75% of people felt that they had been bullied in the workplace. So sharing that with those in your family, they will understand because maybe they have been a target at some point in time. You are exhausted and no longer enjoy your favorite activities. And what that indicates is that you have moved probably from stress and anxiety to some form of depression surrounding this issue. Because when we lose the the desire to do the things that we once enjoyed, that is clearly a sign of depression and certainly the resulting stress. You think constantly of what you have done to provoke this treatment and what you can do to stop it. So what you do is you take it on yourself and you think it must be something I did or I said, or they don't like the way that I dress. I mean, it's amazing what you can take on in terms of this situation. So you are absolutely not alone. Here are some striking statistics, and as I mentioned, more and more research is being done in this area. A great book called Crucial Conversations: An Influencer has been written by a gentleman by the name of David Maxfield. And what he found was, we said 75% in this session. In our last session, 80%. 96% of U.S. employees experience bullying. That is 4% away from the entire working population of the United States. That's frightening. 89% of bullies have been at it for more than a year. Now, think about this. If they have been at it with the same subject or the same person for over a year, think about the stress that has been imposed on that individual. And think about that impact on that individual's health and their life in general, and certainly on their career. 54% have been bullying for more than 5 years. Now, to this statistic, they have not probably been bullying the same person. It's just their pattern, and they just kind of carry on with whoever threatens them in any way. 80% of bullies affect 5 or more people. So you are probably not alone. And that particular bully, he or she is probably bullying some of your peers, some of your colleagues. And it's important to kind of figure that out and then maybe approach those people so you have some support. The sad statistic here is the last one. The person most likely to remain in his or her job is actually the bully. So you don't seem to get rewarded for the good behavior here. But the message is that the bully is forcing more people out of jobs, and that's very unfortunate. And I will tell you this again, but being bullied is really something of a strange compliment, because people only bully those that they are threatened by, those who are extremely competent, and they're threatened that their stature in the corporation or in the workplace is threatened by that person. So really, it's a weird kind of compliment. Not a compliment I have ever enjoyed, but it happens. So some trends in bullying. How does it happen? How does it work? Well, 62% actually sabotage another's work or reputation. So think about the fact that we are in the social media generation, and we also have everything is done via computer, via the web, via the net right now. That gives those interested in sabotaging certainly others' reputations a great opportunity, because with social media you can sabotage somebody very quickly and very broadly. In terms of sabotaging a project, being in the information age makes that a lot easier. You can just go in, change up a few numbers, and somebody can come across looking pretty poor. So it's unfortunate. And sometimes the sabotage is something like, you know what, you have this project and your supervisor tightened the time frame on it to make it positively impossible, even if you stayed up 24 hours a day for the next week to get this done. It's an impossible task. And that's one way of sabotaging. And then 52% of that browbeating, threats, intimidation, very overt kinds of bullying. 4% are the physical intimidation or threats. And those are people know you're not supposed to physically harm someone in the workplace, so it doesn't happen often. Usually happens with somebody who has really reached their limit and they are absolutely crazed, and so they reach out to harm the individual that they're bullying. When that happens, then you have more recourse, because that is clearly harassment and physical violence, and so then of course that will be raised to another level. And it's really interesting when you look at the last statistic on this slide. Respondents to Maxfield's survey, 20% of them reported that workplace bullying cost them at least 7 hours per week. Now, when you think about it, that's one entire business day per week. So that's 20% of their time is spent dealing with this bullying. And that is, obviously you're not going to be able to get your projects done when you're down one day every single week. So here are some signs you're being bullied. And, look at these very carefully, because we all have the capacity at some time or another to be maybe a little bit paranoid, to be maybe a little bit subjective, to feel a little bit put upon. And it's really, really important, to really kind of audit where you're at so that you know that you are being completely objective about this issue. But here are some of the signs. First of all, constant criticism. No matter what you do, how well you do it, what you produce, you are being criticized. There's always something a little bit wrong with it. And so it might be, well, thank you, you got this to me very quickly, but the next time you really should, whatever. And if you know it's pretty much a positive product, not good. Anytime you are yelled at, that is a huge sign. Yelling in the workplace is never, ever, ever appropriate. It is a strategy frequently used by workplace bullies. When they are really frustrated and they want to intimidate you, they will yell. So this is something we want to start to begin to think about what we document. And we document anytime you're yelled at, the time, the date, the circumstances, and what was said. Very important. Boss or coworker remembers every mistake you ever made, even ones from a few years ago, perhaps. That's not a good sign. And gossip and lies are being spread. Bullies resort to this frequently, and what they do is they will try to gather constituents around them so that they're validated. They're not very secure people. They are very insecure, in fact, and so that's what they do. So, when you walk into the restroom and everybody stops talking the minute you open the door and they see who you are, that's not a good sign. If you are left out of meetings, lunches, social occasions, and it's more than once, one time somebody can forget to send you an email. More than that, start to think about it a little bit. As I mentioned previously, anytime your efforts are sabotaged in any way, big red flag. If your work is stolen or plagiarized or someone takes credit, so you're sitting at a conference table and your boss is saying, gee, Sue, this is wonderful work you've done. I can't believe you, came up with this innovative idea, etc. And someone at the other end of the table says, well, actually, that was my idea. You know what? That's a problem. And then, again, boxing you in, giving you these impossible deadlines and schedules. Now, very often that will be a manager or supervisor that does that, but it could be a peer who is responsible for a particular project, perhaps. But the impossible deadlines and schedules, not a good sign. And I want you to keep in mind that a bully is not always just a peer or a colleague. In many cases, a bully can actually be a manager or a supervisor, and you might say, well, what does that accomplish? Well, think about this. Think about a very bright person who comes to a new job, either by job posting or, by a new recruit, and go into an area where maybe the supervisor or manager doesn't have the same degree that you have, from the same school that you have, doesn't have the experience that you have. And so they're in a perfect place to bully you because they can withhold information, make the deadline too tight, etc. So, don't discount your manager or supervisor as a bully. But as I said before, oddly, bullying is an unwelcome compliment. Most bullies do operate out of that sense of fear because they lack self-esteem. They are extremely insecure, and they're intimidated by their target. So again, perfect example is that new person coming to the workplace has a track record of, a better school that they went to, better experience, Maybe they, did something that the other individual had failed at. I had somebody bullied me in the workplace, so I have been a victim and I know what that feels like. And part of the issue was that I had started a very successful company, thankfully, that was acquired by a Fortune 500, and this individual had tried to do 2 startups that had failed. And so I was constantly his target, and it was not a pleasant time for me, very honestly, but a very insecure individual. So bullies often have controlling or obsessive personalities that can shift quickly from one mood to the other. You see this all the time with bullies. Bullies are the people who can be fun and, political and entertaining, and then turn on a dime and be that kind of controlling, obsessive personality. So that's what you have to watch for. Bullies are also people who are generally unable to accept responsibility for their own actions. So what do? They transfer that responsibility to their victims. So you will see somebody, here's an example, somebody in a sales position, maybe the head of sales, and their own sales numbers are very, very low. They haven't done well. But, people who work for them have done a lot better. They will actually take and blame their sales figures on that person's statistics by saying, well, my sales numbers are low because I was helping her to achieve what she got. And she needed my tutoring, and she needed me to be out there on sales calls with her. And that's the kind of thing that they do all the time. They absolutely operate to hide their own incompetence. So by, being a big bully, and telling you what you need to be doing and, controlling your situation, they are covering for themselves and their own incompetence. And they will also attempt to convince you that you need their help. And maybe you are the most competent person in the world, but, they want you to be dependent upon them. Now, remember, again, the title of this slide, bullying is an unwelcome compliment, and that's what it is, because the target of bullies, the best and the brightest, are frequently the target of bullies. Frequently, because they threaten an individual. Someone goes into a workplace and they're, not that sharp, not that ambitious, they're probably not going to get bullied. Not that I'm suggesting that you become not too sharp, not too innovative, and not too ambitious, but just saying that individual is probably not as much the target. So some things you might experience as you are part of this bullying situation. And now here's what I want to tell you. This is why I'm giving you all of these signs and so forth, because it's very difficult. Initially, you think, am I really being bullied? Maybe it's my imagination. Maybe I'm being oversensitive. So, as Erin mentioned, you will receive a copy of the slides, I believe, tomorrow. Keep this and keep a copy in your desk drawer and go back to these things if you're in that situation, just as a little audit, basically. But first of all, if you are getting inadequate training or explanation for the job you've been given to do, that might suggest that you're in a position where you're being bullied, because very often, that's exactly what will happen. They'll give you a certain amount of information and they'll withhold the rest because you'll blow it on the rest that they withhold, clearly. I know, sometimes you can be in a position, and this happens frequently with emails, where you'll get one email, but then the missing link email you won't receive because they don't want you to hear that. And you'll think, God, am I losing my mind? And they'll say, oh, yeah, I sent you that email. And you go through every email and you can't find it, and they didn't send you that email. And maybe it was a mistake, and maybe it wasn't. So anytime you get that withholding of information, that's huge. When I had my own bullying experience, I had my own office, and I actually had it set up so that my computer looked out into these beautiful woods. I ended up turning my desk around to look out the door because the person who was harassing me, basically, although bullying is not technically called harassment, walk by my office like 100 times a day, and that's something bullies will do. They'll walk by and basically stalk because they want to control you, so they want to see what you're doing now. And so I turned my desk around so that I was facing the door, not as pleasant or pastoral a scene, but you know what? I could see him and I could look him in the eye every time he walked by, and that helped me. If you are alienated by your coworkers who have been told to stop talking to you, that is very sad, but sadly it does happen. So if all of a sudden people are not talking to you for no good reason, that's a sign. If your tormentor screams at you in front of others, but you absolutely know that you cannot scream back or there will be huge restitution. Anytime anybody screams at you, yells at you in the workplace environment, that is absolutely not okay. That is something that should absolutely be documented immediately and taken to HR. But bullies do that. If you are accused of incompetence despite a history of excellence, another huge sign. Now, again, let's go back to the perspective of the individual who was a superstar. And I'm thinking of an actual situation. Somebody was actually had their doctorate and they were a phenomenal superstar and were recruited by an organization, got there. They were obviously and absolutely the smartest person in the place, and some odd things started happening. And so, what you tend to see is that, this person started to think, gosh, am I like losing my mind? Have I gotten dementia? My last job, I had superb excellence. I have a doctorate in this area. I know I get along well with people, and they do all this checkbox in their mind. And, well, you know what? No, it's not you. You're being accused of incompetence because somebody else is actually incompetent and insecure. And then you confront your tormentor and you're accused of harassment. Like, how dare you say anything about me? That's the sign that generally you are being bullied. Because here's the thing, if you confront someone who is not bullying you, their response is generally shock, and they want to know how to fix it. They want to know what they're doing wrong that makes you think that. And they want to fix that immediately. So when they kind of flip it and they're accusing you of harassment, that's a sign that you are probably dealing with a bullying situation, quite frankly. So what do people generally do when they're bullied? Well, again, some wonderful surveys, some wonderful studies out. One from Vital Smarts, and they surveyed 2,000 employees. 64% said they avoid the bully. Now, if I were to run another poll and ask the 75% of people who have experienced this, I would guess that I would get at least that percentage saying that they avoid the bully. That's certainly what I did most of the time, because it's easier. You just don't even want to see that person. 58% said they vent about the bully to coworkers. That's not a bad idea, as long as you find coworkers who you can trust, and you can trust them without any doubt. Then it's not a bad thing for a couple of reasons. First of all, venting will be very helpful. It will be helpful to talk to somebody from the same work culture that you're in, because some things that are considered appropriate in other work cultures are inappropriate in some. So, something similar perspective. But also in venting to those coworkers, if it ever comes to the point where it's turned from simple bullying to some very overt form of harassment, you will have them as backup and testimony. 49% say they avoid working with them on projects. Well, I can't imagine why. 48% say they have considered quitting. And if you have considered quitting because of one individual, that's probably a surefire sign that that individual is bullying you. And 45% say they engage in dysfunctional workarounds to avoid problems with the bully. So, maybe you are taking all of your work home and getting it done there and having your spouse check it to make sure there are no problems so they can't say there's an error when you come back tomorrow. There are all kinds of dysfunctional workarounds that we can come up with when we're backed into a corner like this. So what should you do if you're being bullied? Well, first of all, and let me stress, the first word in that first bullet is objectively. I can't stress that enough. You need to be objective. You can't ever take on the role of somebody who feels persecuted. They just don't like me and that's why they're bullying me. Don't go there first. Certainly be as objective as you possibly can. And think about whether this is one isolated incident, or is this actually a trend? So how are you going to do that? Well, really, you have to write it down. I can't stress that enough. Keep a journal, keep a log that you say, okay, today on Tuesday, July 21st at 1 o'clock, I was in a meeting and Joe asked again where all of the work that isn't due for 3 weeks is in front of other people, and be that specific in your entries to that journal. So that's the first thing that you really have to do. You have to make a journal for two reasons. First of all, because it gives you a better way to objectively assess the situation. When you read it, you can see, and you're not reacting as emotionally as you might. Secondly, if you need a paper trail, because this has to go to a higher level, then you have it. Seek professional help if you need to. Now, remember that I said that this has severe impact upon one's health. Stress, depression, anxiety, and a whole range of other diseases that result from those. So, you all have employee assistance programs, and that is a great application for an EAP. EAP counselors are trained and have experience in working with workplace issues very specifically, so that is exactly the kind of place you want to go for help. Why do you want to go for help? Not because you're weak, because they will help you to assess your perspective more rationally. You know, they're a voice a little bit outside of your head. They'll help you to walk confidently, and you see that's my last bullet, that walk confidently with your head held high. And, you know, going to the EAP and discussing this, I think, will help you to accomplish that. So again, that written record of your interactions. If there are emails or any kind of paper trail at all, save those records off-site. I would save every record off-site. Bullies cover their tracks. And so if a bully thinks that you might be documenting or even guesses that that could happen, the bully might go to your office on a weekend and go looking for those documentation files. So keep a copy of those off-site at home, perhaps. Confront your bully. And absolutely, I would always confront the bully, even if you're not sure yet that that individual is a bully, and it's all in how you present. So if you're confronting someone that you think may be bullying you, you might go to them in a meeker fashion and say, gee, you know what, I hope I haven't done anything to upset you, to be offensive to you, and see how they come off. And if you are going and confronting someone who has been contentious and you have some pretty good thoughts that this person is a significant and ongoing bully, then kind of presenting that, you know, I'm feeling a bit bullied and I don't know why, and I certainly want to fix this, and, you know, I'm on your team. With the bully, here's one suggestion that's really important. Just because of who bullies are, try to say something positive with admiration about them first. And I know that's really, really tough when you put up with this, but if you meet them at a very positive, praise them, then you're going to get a lot further with them in discussion. So certainly know your employer's policy, and even if your employer has a policy, because all of this sort of thing is brand new. In report the bully, presenting evidence if possible. I would go first to HR before I went to the supervisor or manager, because HR might, first of all, have a policy. Secondly, might know the situation in that business unit better, might know, you know, who would be the better person to go to, might be able to help you to manage it in a more invisible fashion. So definitely go to HR and present any and all evidence that you have. And again, walk confidently with your head held high. I cannot stress that enough. So as a manager, it's really difficult when you have employees who are bullying each other, or you're witnessing this in your workplace. So it's imperative that you set a good example by showing courtesy and respect, and encourage some trust-building activities. There are all kinds of great books and so forth that help with trust-building activities these days. So you might want to do an off-site, perhaps, with folks. And we've all heard about those things with people falling backward and somebody has to catch them, and the ropes program and so forth. So those things could be helpful, actually, to kind of setting a different standard for your team. But your own actions, your own courtesy and respect are paramount in terms of setting the right example. Provide regular opportunities for your team to check in with you, and maintain an open door policy. Now, as I shared previously, I was in the process of doing an on-site management training program yesterday, and we were talking about the open door policy, and a wonderful supervisor said that, she did that. And we talked about reaching out to each of your employees at least once a month or more frequently. And she said that often she didn't have time to reach out to everyone. So the people that she didn't reach out to were her highest performers. Well, guess what? They're also the people who are probably being bullied. So we encouraged her to set time in her calendar to reach out to those folks, because that's very, very important, to have that face-to-face time with them. It strengthens them, and you might even learn something good from those folks. Maintain that open door policy, so your office door is always open and people can wander in at any level. So if you are the senior vice president, the file clerk could wander in and tell you what's going on in his life. That's terrific. Another strategy that is very effective is something called managing by wandering around. And it is something that came to the forefront with Hewlett-Packard back in the late 1970s. And the concept is basically, at a different time every day, so you're not predictable, you wander around the call center, you wander around the desks, you wander around where people are. You have a chance to observe behavior, but you also have a chance to observe, whether somebody's feeling very uncomfortable and so forth, and hopefully nip it in the bud. Can be very effective. Have the team work together to build team tenets or rules of conduct. So if they're participating in these rules of conduct, they're going to uphold them better. We know that. So make bullying strategy part of that. Investigate any and all complaints promptly and impartially. It's really hard to be impartial. We are all human. We just like some employees better than others. Maybe they share common interests to us. Or a common philosophy, but you have to be impartial. You can't show any partiality. And it's really important to investigate those complaints promptly and then to take action and close that loop. Just to have people express that this is what's going on is not enough. So you need to run that up the flagpole as high as you can. So maybe, it's HR, maybe HR isn't responding or reacting, maybe you take it a step higher than that. Always respect privacy. Remember that I mentioned that people are even reluctant to go home and talk to their loved ones about this. So you'll get some of the story, maybe not all of the story. Respect their privacy. And always consider, this is really important to think about, could you ever be the bully in any case? Could you ever be imposing deadlines upon a new employee that you're not really sure of, you don't really like, perhaps, and those deadlines are, just too out of whack. They're not realistic. It can happen. We are all human, and I think we all have to check ourselves for that, because guess what? We can feel threatened too. And so checking ourselves in terms of that is important. So there's a great bill that, and as I mentioned, lots of research going on, no actual law on record yet, but currently 29 states and 2 territories have introduced the Anti-Bullying Healthy Workplace Bill. And the bill actually establishes a standard for misconduct, so it would take it one step beyond the employer's policy. And protects employers, this is really important, from vicarious liability risk if appropriate internal prevention measures are in effect. What does that mean? Well, they would look to make sure that you had an anti-bullying policy in your company, that maybe you had an open door policy, that you were, amenable to talking to employees on every level. And when they establish that, if a claim came against your company, It would go not against the company and not against the organization, but if you see that next bullet down, plaintiffs are required to use private attorneys, and the bully is sued as an individual. So you can't carry on in a company and be a terrible bully and think, oh, if there's any problem, my employee will have to take care of it. They won't say anything to me. If this bill passes, you will own it. The same thing is true for sexual harassment right now. So it is a precedent. So I think it can absolutely happen. And it would also seek restoration of lost wages. If somebody had to leave the workplace because they were so stressed they had to go out on medical leave, or if they had left their job because they couldn't stand it anymore and they hadn't yet gotten another job, it would restore those wages in between the two jobs, and absolutely compels employers to prevent and correct future instances of bullying. So as I mentioned, there are some fabulous resources. One is that Workplace Bullying Institute, which is at www.workplacebullying.org, a compendium of information there of all kinds. Again, Forbes magazine has stepped up and done lots of work on the bullying issue. They're another great place to go. As you can see, I have that link out there for you as well. And then there is a link on the Healthy Workplace Bill that can tell you if you are in a particular state where the bill is there, if you have the capability, the interest to go and help to, get the bill introduced or push through, that's a great thing to do. You can really be a salvation to your coworkers. And so thank you for joining us today. And now I know that there probably will be some further questions, so I will wait for a few minutes for Erin to introduce those. Thank you.
Great, Mary Ellen. Thank you so much. So we have a couple questions to start with, and anybody that has a question, if you want to insert it into your questions panel, I will happily pass those along for you. And again, they're all anonymous. So Mary Ellen, our first question is, do you feel like a good first step is to speak to your bully directly, or should you always start with HR?
I would speak to the bully directly. Because first of all, you want to establish that bullying is really happening. And so if you go to the bully in a very collaborative fashion, and again, you've got to be prepared. So you've got to take that deep breath. You've got to get yourself in that mindset. Come out of anger, come out of anxiety, go to the bully and say, I hope, and the way I would couch it, first of all, say something positive about that person, because remember, those are the very insecure people who lack self-esteem. So say, hey, your presentation last week was fabulous, but I have to talk to you because I'm really concerned that I might have said or done something to annoy you, upset you. Start out on that ground. See what they say. Watch their reaction. Watch their body language. So if you are getting them sitting back with their arms crossed and they're not receptive at all, and they say, oh, no, everything's fine, but you're not reading that, that tells you something. However, if their body language is more open and they seem to be shocked that you think that and upset, then you might, be able to work it out. So I would always go to the bully first, unless you are so terrified, but you shouldn't be.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Our next question is, what about a new supervisor who imposes an unrealistic workload in order to drive an employee out? And secondly, how could this be proved?
It's very difficult to prove that, and I'm just going to be very honest with you. It does happen, and sometimes with a new supervisor, give the new supervisor the benefit of the doubt in that they may just not understand, how long it takes people to do things, and so the imposition of their time frame might purely be based on ignorance, essentially, or inexperience. So I would say the first thing, would be to go to the supervisor and say, hey, in a very logical fashion, I have these particular projects to do in addition to this. These are how much time this is how much time these projects are going to take. This is how much time I need for this one. And if it continues, then you need to go to HR, because there are supervisors who do that, particularly if they are threatened by an underling who they assume could take their role.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, how would you encourage a shy victim to speak up or step forward?
I guess I would use the Nike slogan, just do it. And you know what? It's really hard when you're shy, but this is your career, this is your livelihood, and you need to just take responsibility for it and just do it. And I will tell you very honestly that once you have done that, you will feel 500% better and really good about yourself. So step on out there.
Good advice, Mary Ellen. Next, someone is asking if you know if videotaping or recording audio from a bully is allowed.
I'm sorry, Erin, could you repeat that question? I'm not sure I understood it.
So they're
There,
asking if they're allowed to videotape or record the actual bullying that they're
I
experiencing.
see. Okay. As far as I know, you are not allowed to record it. No. I have never heard that before. It's an interesting strategy. You can absolutely document it in writing, every detail. And that's what I would suggest, that you make sure that you notate, the date, the time of day, the situation, and absolutely other people who were around when that happened. And document, and as I mentioned before, keep those documents off-site in your home somewhere that the bully absolutely would never have access to.
Great, thank you. Someone would like some uh, tips for confronting a passive-aggressive bully.
Okay, tips for confronting a passive-aggressive bully. You have to really state the facts, and that's what they're really good at, like getting away from the facts. So you have to be able to state the facts very clearly and confront them in that respect. So you write it down first, write everything down first before you go to them. And then you say, hey, you know what, I know that, you seem really happy, but, and everything has to be separated out and documented and put in front of them. If you can do that with a mediator or a moderator, that's a good thing, but that's not always possible.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Our next question, I think they're asking beyond the written documentation, what other types of proof can be collected to make a strong case to HR?
Well, certainly time frames. If you present to HR with a project and then the time frame you were given to do that, so there's an email that states, okay, this needs to be done by tomorrow, and it's hours and hours and hours of work, and it was presented to you, and they can see a date stamp on the email that says, 2:34 in the afternoon, I want this done by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. It's a job that would take weeks. That is extremely convincing to HR. So again, it still involves that documentation, but taking, the framework around it and the relevance to time, that anything that can be concrete, that you can make concrete, will be much easier for HR to be helpful to you.
Great, thank you.
I think, Erin, one of the most difficult things in the bullying, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay, Mary Ellen. No, go ahead.
Erin, one of the most difficult things in the bullying situation is the he said, she said situation. So it's really important to avoid that and have things documented.
Great. Our next question asker wants to know if they're the supervisor being approached about their employee being bullied, if it's their responsibility to investigate, or should they send the person to HR?
It depends upon your organization, your relationship with the person, your comfort level in terms of investigating on your own, and what support you have from above. So if you have a phenomenal boss who does not ever tolerate bullying, you have the time and capability to investigate, at least on a preliminary basis. You might want to do that and then send things up to HR if you think need be. If you don't have any of the above, so you don't have the supportive boss, you don't have the time to do this, you don't have the ability to document and so forth, then HR is a better recourse than just letting it hang. Very often I will see people say, oh, I'm going to take care of this, I'm going to look into this, and then it just sits there. So if it's going to sit there, don't offer to do it.
Great. Our next question is very interesting. So, what is your opinion about how the different generations in the workplace affect various perceptions of what bullying is?
That's a very interesting question. And I guess that the different generations in the workplace, I don't think millennials are as threatened by each other as the older generations, for one thing. So I think you might see a little less bullying go on there. I think they tend to be more overt in their communications, where bullying is often the result of folks who are not overt in their communications and they're insecure, and so this terrible situation occurs. I think we tend to see it more probably in baby boomers and the Gen X folks, simply because they may have been treated like this as children and they kind of pass that down. But that's an excellent question and certainly worth even a lot more thought than I just offered.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Our next question is, what would good next steps be if you've reported the bully and gone through the appropriate channels, but the bully has not been reined in or stopped?
Okay, well, then you've got to think about whether you go to HR, or you know what, sometimes you're in a situation like that and the only recourse, perhaps, if possible, is job posting. Because if nobody's going to rein them in and they're kind of the star and they're allowed to behave that way, you just don't want to keep rolling with this situation because it's not going to help you in any way. So if job posting exists in your organization, that's a good place to start to look, particularly why you want to make sure that the bully doesn't affect your performance appraisal in any way, and that even though you don't want to go to work on Monday morning, that you do go because you'll have a good attendance record and that will help you to job post. There are situations, Erin, as we all know, sadly, where things just can't be worked out and someone leaves. As we've noted in a prior slide, the bullies don't tend to leave. It tends to be the other individual.
Great, thank you, Mary Ellen. This person is asking how you would deal with someone who's been in their position for 10 years and refuses to understand that new people may be hired for their unique expertise. How would you talk to them?
Someone who's been in their position for 10 years, they have expertise and they have history that no new person is going to have. So some of their edge is that history. And it's important for them to know that they're valued for that, and nobody will share that with them. But the expertise of the new people can actually be strengthening to them. And so they might want to learn from the expertise of the new folks joining the group. And I think that's a great question because it's obviously somebody who's very thoughtful, and perhaps a supervisor who's very thoughtful who's asking that question, that may have that situation occur, and they're trying to think ahead of the curve, which is a great thing to do to prepare, so that that individual who's been in that job for 10 years will not be threatened, and you'll move towards collaboration.
Great advice, Mary Ellen. The next question is interesting. I'm going to try to give a synopsis, so I'll apologize to the asker. But if you're dealing with someone who has a special circumstance, such as autism or Asperger's, so there's something special about that particular relationship, but they're treating you in an inappropriate or bullying way, what things would you take into consideration when addressing that person?
Okay, now I guess I'd have to clarify the question a little bit. Is the person with Asperger's or ADD the bully or the individual who's being bullied?
The bully.
Okay, that makes it a little bit different, and that's an excellent question, because very often the bully who has that kind of a disability, let's take the example of Asperger's. If they have that kind of disability, prevents them from having strong communication skills and patterns, strong relationships with people. So to some degree, their reaction may be in part bullying because they're threatened, and in part just their inability to, have empathy and relate to another individual. So when that's the case, it's also not going to be easy to talk to them, very honestly. Then I would go to the supervisor or manager of that individual and explain what's going on, if you're sure there is that disability. Second one, if somebody has ADHD, some of their issue may not actually be bullying, but just that they kind of hop around from thing to thing so quickly, and they may have not given you information, and then they may not be withholding information. It's just that that's how they function. So they may have given you some, and then they were distracted. So looking at that carefully and objectively as well, and talking to them. So you can sit down and have a conversation with the individual with ADD. With the individual with Asperger's, depending on who that person is, it might be a whole lot more difficult to do that. So that's when I would think about HR potentially, if it is known that that individual has Asperger's, certainly. But if not, going to HR and describing what's happening, because they may have knowledge of that disability and be able to help you. So I guess there are two strategies, Erin, depending on that disability.
Excellent. Great. Thanks, Mary Ellen. I think that addressed her question. So lastly, one more question, and I think this, I want to make a comment because another listener also commented on this earlier, but this is about if a bully leaves a message, can you use it against them? And I know another of our attendees said that people need to check their state laws about using audio recordings, so that's probably
Yep.
good and sound advice.
Yep, absolutely. Very good advice.
More to say on
Yep.
that, Mary Ellen, and then also any
Yep.
closing remarks.
Okay, so yes, actually, if a bully leaves you a message and it's a message in writing, I mean, that is evidence. You can take that to your HR department. Absolutely. And that's excellent advice about the audio recording. Do check your state laws. But, something in writing, it's not a recording that somebody doesn't know that you're recording. That is extremely overt. And so whether that is via email, via paper, doesn't matter. If it is in writing, absolutely, that becomes evidence. But don't forget what I said. Take all of that, at least copies of anything and everything off-site, and maintain it off-site.
Great, thank you, Mary Ellen. Well, that's about all we have time for. So, Mary Ellen, I'll just ask if you have any comments before we wrap up.
I do, actually. I am very happy that so many folks joined us today, because so often when we are being bullied, it's something that we hold inside. We try to think it's not happening initially. We deny it. Then when we realize it's happening, we are just so stunned. We feel embarrassed to talk about it and ashamed that we're not better managing what's happening to us. So remember, the one tip I would have for you is always hold your head high. Get the kind of help and support you need. In most corporations and employers, the HR department will be in tune with you, will want to do a thorough and fair investigation. If you can run it up the flagpole less, start with the bully themselves, because maybe it isn't intended. Maybe when you bring it up, they'll stop it. Then go up to the supervisor or manager of the bully, not necessarily yours, but of the bully, and then certainly take it to HR. Do not live with this. It can be very, very harmful to you. And remember all of the terrific supports that we have, and I'm just going to flip back to that slide that I shared with the links, and you will have this slide deck to reflect on. But workplacebullying.org for the Workplace Bullying Institute, excellent information. And for each of you, you might want to go and look at that. That might be really reinforcing to our discussion today. And then Forbes.com. Forbes has many articles and entire sections of its magazine devoted to this topic. And then the Healthy Workplace Bill will give you more information about the bill itself, states that are working with it currently, if there's an opportunity to get engaged with your state in this bill. So some good places to go as well, but just hold your head up high and take action. Thank you so much for joining us today. Excellent questions.
Agreed. Thank you so much, Mary Ellen, for your time, and thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful
My pleasure. Thank you.